Humans have limitations and possibilities that allow for transcendence. Man must acknowledge, accept, and deal with his or her limitations and possibilities in order to transcend. One must comprehend the intricacy of the human being in order to assist man in this endeavor. The nature of the human person as an embodied spirit is complex, which imposes both limitations and possibilities. Therefore, understanding the nature of the human being as an embodied spirit is important in order to recognize one's limitations and possibilities for transcendence. Mabuhay, this is Owen. In this lesson, we will study Plato's metaphysical dichotomy of the human person and how it relates to the possibilities and limitations of man. This lesson on the recognition of man's limitation and possibilities for transcendence is grounded on Plato's philosophy on human nature. Considering such, the following are questions to facilitate the discussion of the lesson. 1. What is the explanation of Plato on human nature? 2. How does the human nature as described by Plato impose limitations and possibilities? 3. How does the human nature as explained by Plato contributes to transcendence? Familiarize yourself with the questions for you to use them in the discussion of the lesson. Our discussion will first focus on the metaphysical dichotomy of human person as explained by Plato. The nature of the human person is seen in the metaphysical dichotomy between body and soul. This dichotomy implies that there is an inherent contradiction between the body and soul. On the one hand, the body according to Plato is material, hence it is mutable and destructible. On the other hand, the soul is immaterial, hence it is immutable and indestructible. Inasmuch as the body is material, mutable, and destructible while the soul is immaterial, immutable, and indestructible, Plato contends that in the context of the nature of the human person the body's existence is dependent on the soul while the soul's existence is independent of the body. In fact, in the Timaeus, Plato argues that the soul existed prior to the body. Plato writes, "The gods made the soul prior to the body and more venerable in birth and excellence to the body's mistress and governor." Interestingly then, as Eddie Babor claims the contention above made Plato conclude that the human person is just a soul using a body. According to Plato, there are three parts of the soul, namely, the rational, the spiritual, and the appetitive. For Plato, the rational soul is located in the head, the spiritual soul in the chest, and the appetitive in the abdomen. According to Plato, these spiritual and appetitive souls contribute to the motion and activity of the whole person, while the rational soul's function is to guide the spiritual and appetitive souls. For Plato, the appetitive part of the soul drives the human person to experience thirst, hunger, and other physical wants, while the spiritual soul drives the human person to experience abomination, anger, and other emotional feelings. Lastly, it is the rational part of the soul that enables the human person to think, reflect, analyze, comprehend, draw conclusions and the like. As we can see, the rational soul, which is the highest of all parts of the soul, guides the other two parts, namely the appetitive and the spiritual. What else could perform this guiding function, from Plato's point of view, but the rational part of the soul? To illustrate, think of a desperately thirsty man in the desert. He sees a pool of water, and approaches it with all the eagerness that deprivation can create, but when he reaches the pool, he sees a sign: danger, do not drink polluted. He experiences conflict within his desire that urges him to drink, but the reason tells him that such signs usually indicate the truth that polluted water will make him very ill, or may kill him, and that if he drinks, he will probably be worse off than he doesn't. He decides not to drink. In this case, it is the rational part of the soul that opposes his desire. His reason guides him away from the water. The principle then that drives the person to drink is called appetite, while the principle that forbids the person to drink the water, because it is polluted, is called reason. Having discussed the nature of the human person according to Plato, let us discuss the limitations and possibilities of man as imposed by the human nature. On the metaphysical dichotomy, Plato illustrates the limitations and possibilities of the human person on the following context. The human person has body and soul, and the components of the human soul. On the body and soul of man. The nature of the human body and soul imposes limitations and possibilities. For Plato, the soul exists prior to the body. It can then be concluded that 1. The soul is an entity distinct from the body. 2. The body and soul are separable. 3. The human person is just a soul using a body. Plato believes that the soul is imprisoned in the body and that the soul survives the death of the body because the soul is immaterial, immutable, and indestructible, while the body decomposes because it is material, mutable, and destructible. Furthermore, when the person dies, the soul leaves the body and goes back to the world of forms. To explain further, it must be noted that in Plato's doctrine of form, there are two kinds of worlds, namely the world of forms and the world of matter, and for Plato everything comes from the world of forms, and everything that exists which describes the world of matter, will go back to the world of forms after it perishes. Again, when the human person dies, the body decomposes and the soul will go back to the world of forms, and lives there eternally. Based on this, it can be concluded that the body in the world of matter sets limits to the human person, because it is material, mutable, destructible, and temporal. On the other hand, the soul from the world of form creates human possibilities, because it is immaterial, immutable, indestructible, and eternal. On the components of the human soul. Another way to look on the concept of limitations and possibilities of the human person is to analyze Plato's description of the components of the human soul. For Plato, desire, spirit, and reason make up the soul. Desire motivates, spirit animates, and reason guides. This suggests that the appetitive soul and the spiritual soul can set limit to the human person, because the two possess a positive and negative nature. On the other hand, the rational soul, which is positioned in the highest level, is there for the possibilities of the human person because it works on reason. Consider this: a man who is angry with another person who insulted him desires to kill his offender, but does not actually kill the culprit because he knows that if he does he will be in prison. With the same thread of reasoning, the desire of man limits himself or herself, but the reasoning of man serves the possibility to redirect man. Plato argues that it is the spirit in man that makes the person angry with his derider, yet his anger is curbed by reason, that is, by the rational soul. Transcendence in its simplest sense is the capacity of the individual to overcome his limitations. The human person is endowed with possibilities that he or she can utilize to transcend. Considering Plato's metaphysical dichotomy of the human person, transcendental can be achieved by harnessing the blessings of the human soul, and by maintaining a well-balanced personality. A well-balanced personality is achieved by allowing reason to successfully guide desire and spirit. Plato's metaphysical dichotomy of the human person suggests that the human being is not just a physical body but an embodied spirit. The nature of man as an embodied spirit sets the limitations and possibilities for human transcendence. In connection, by recognizing the limitations of the body and the possibilities of the soul, man can be able to transcend. This lesson emphasizes that Plato's dichotomy of the human person suggests that man is an embodied spirit, in which man is body and soul. Man's embodiment causes limitations and possibilities for human transcendence, in which the body sets the limits, because it is mutable and destructible, but the soul creates possibilities, because it is immutable and indestructible. Furthermore, the three parts of the soul illustrates that the appetitive soul and the spiritual soul impose limits, while the rational soul creates possibilities, because it guides the appetitive and the spiritual. With this, transcendence of man is possible through the rational soul. This is Owen, concluding this lesson by encouraging you to recognize and learn from your limitations, and to harness your possibilities for you. to transcend into the best version of yourself. Mabuhay. Be a blessing to yourself and others.